Okay, today I want to tie a March brown. It's a wet fly. It's a very popular fly in our rivers. You could say it's a drab-looking fly, but it's very successful for trout, for brown trout, and for sea trout. It's good for trout as an early season fly, March and April. It's it's named after the natural fly of the same name. Now, it's the natural fly, believe it or not, is quite scarce in South Wales. And we do have a few on the Ogmore. And there are plenty on the Usk where they get good hatches. And there's a dry fly version of it, and there's also a nymph version. But this is a wet fly. And you may say, well, if it's a sparse fly, why bother to tie it? Well, the thing is, when I say sparse, I mean not many about. It's a very good taker of fish, and it really is a surprisingly good fly for what it is. Now, it's a fly of fast rocky streams and rivers. It's never found in still water, but surprisingly enough, it's a good fly on lakes, which is a bit of a surprise, as I say. Now, it's good for sea trout as well. When you tie it for sea trout, you can use a larger hook if you want to. This one in the vise is a size 10 partridge. But when we tie it for sea trout, you can go larger, and I recommend a silver ribbed body or a gold ribbed body. But for brown trout, the natural fly is very, very good indeed, and I do recommend it. Now, as I say, that's a size 10 partridge. I'm going to be using brown silk. The label's worn off, but the size which I tend to use all the time is 8/0 uni thread. Okay, I'm going to start. First of all, I wax the silk. Give it a pretty good waxing, taking care you don't break it, because I'm going to do a dubbed body. That's a fur body. Okay, here we go. Behind the eye, 3 forward, 1, 2, 3, and then 3 back, 1, 2, 3. Our silk is secure there, but we're going to take it down towards the bend. And I don't need touch and turns because I'm going to, it's going to have a roughish body. We don't quite need that foundation on there. Okay, the first item is the tail. Partridge hackle is used a lot on this fly, and it's a very useful hackle. I'll pull one off to show you. Now, partridge is a body hackle. It's from the body of the bird as opposed to the neck or the cape of the domestic cockerels and chickens that we often talk about. This is either from the chest of the partridge or from the back. And one thing about a body hackle, whatever bird it comes from, it always has a thick stalk. So you can tie them as a collar hackle on certain flies, but then you would tie it in by the tip. But I'm not going to talk about that today too much. I'm just going to use this for the tail. And I'll be using the same feather for the throat hackle later on. Now, I'll get it about there. So I'll take my silk down to start covering it. And you'll see there's the tail. Okay, I'll tie that down pretty secure. When you tie a tail, always keep a bit of pressure towards you. That stops the tail going over. That's our tail on. Now the body is ribbed, and I use a gold sort of wire. You can use a copper wire. I use copper sometimes. It doesn't make any difference what you use, really. But today I'm going to use the gold. Take a bit off and I tie it in. Now, because this is a wet fly, we don't need to worry about adding weight. I don't use wire ribs on dry flies because they're designed to float, and when they float you don't want additional weight. I hardly ever use it anyway. Now I'll just leave that wire there until I put the dubbin on. Now the dubbin is from a hare's ear. This is actually from the mask, which is the same type of fur. I've run out of ears, but it doesn't make any difference. You just pluck off bits of hair like this, pardon me, pluck off bits and build up a little pile on your bench there ready to use. And although I've waxed the silk, I'm going to give it some more wax just like that. Can you see that? Now, the secret with a dubbed body is not to use too much of the fur. Most people, newcomers anyway, tend to put on too much. Add a little at a time. It's there's a bit of a saying in our club: pull off the fur you think you're going to need and then half it. And some guys say, and then half it again. So you're making a sort of a rope. There are various ways of dubbing. We've got some very skilled guys in our class, and they form a loop and they put the dubbing in and spin the loop with a spinner. It's a very good way. I don't think one is any better than the other. I tend to do this. It's pretty straightforward. Before I do it, I'm going to put a little bit of varnish on the shank of the hook. Some say it's not necessary. It doesn't matter too much. You can do it if you want to. It's my job to show you various ways of doing this. Okay, now then, you may notice I didn't take the silk right to the tail. I've left some room. I will now wind to the tail, ready to start the body. About there. It makes a roughish body, and hare's fur, for some reason, it's a bit like other old-fashioned materials. Peacock herl is another one that have some sort of magical attraction for trout. I like it very much. And I'm always happy if I've got a bit of hare's ear on my flies and a bit of peacock as well. There's no peacock in this fly. Okay, now that's the body on. If you feel you've got it a bit lumpy in places, pull it off. But a roughish body is perfectly okay. Causes no problems. In fact, a lot of people use a bit of Velcro and rough it up. Now, one thing I want to tell you, when I put on a dubbed body, or other bodies as well, but I'll just talk about this fly, you wound it over like that as normal. When we rib, which helps the body, we rib the opposite way. So I'm going to rib under. And the reason is, if I wound over, the ribbing wires would get tucked down in between the winds of the body, and it wouldn't do its job of protecting the body from the trout's teeth. So that's now coming over in sort of even turns up towards the eye. And notice I'm going the wrong way. I say I'm counter-winding. And we get up to about there. And I'll tie this off, secure it with a few turns like that. Now, to remove the wire, a good way is to agitate it like that until it snaps. It takes a little bit of time, so I'm going to use my old scissors right up the end here to nip it off. I don't use my best scissors for this sort of thing. And now I'll just tidy up a little bit. Okay, the next item is the throat hackle, or another name is the beard hackle. It's the same thing. You may hear some people call it one thing and people call it another. Again, back to the partridge feather, and we'll draw off what we think we're going to need, about that amount roughly. Nip it off, and we tie this up underneath. I'm going to, I look for a bend to have it down that way. So it's sort of like that. I'm going to use for this what we call the pinch and loop method. I'm pinching my finger and thumb together, and I bring the silk up, in between and down, and I add a few turns to secure it. That's our hackle there. Now I want to nip off these stubs here. Carefully, without cutting the silk. Okay, that's okay, that's fine. The next item now, it can be a little bit difficult. It's the wing. And we use partridge, hen, feather, tail or wing. I'm going to use the primaries here. The wing primaries. They're from a left hand and a right hand wing. You need opposing wings, and you can see where I've cut plenty off as time has gone on. And what we do with this, we take 2 wing slips. Estimate the amount you think you're going to need. It's about there. And I'll cut this off. This will be one of the wings. I'm sorry I'm out of sight here doing this, but my camera lens doesn't allow. Now I'm going to do the other side. So I get about the same measurement. About there. And that's the other wing slip, which I will cut off. Now the reason we use opposing wing slips is because the wings go on like this and they sort of support each other. If you use 2 from one side, they'll both curve the same way and may cause the fly, when it's fishing, to be a bit unbalanced in the water. Right, now my next job is to line up these wings. I've got it like this. I'm going to line up the tips. It's a little bit fiddly, but it's worth persevering with, so that we've got that type of thing. Okay, I tend to nip the ends fairly straight so I can see them both when I tie them down. So I've got that. Now that really is what we need to achieve, and the wing comes to the tip of the tail, a bit like that. Okay, I'm going to do the pinch and loop again, in between my finger and thumb, down, and you see the stumps coming up. That tells me I've got it pretty well okay. Now I'll just make sure I'll add a couple of turns like this. Now when you do this, try not to wind up over onto the wing once you've got them on, because that could turn the wing over. It doesn't matter about the front. We've got that sorted now. So we're down to there. So I'm now going to remove these stubs. Like that. To clear the eye. And I finish off the fly. I'm forming the head, which not only secures the wings but secures the whole fly. Just like that. And I'll do a whip finish shortly. Before I do the whip finish, I get my one of my varnish pots. I tend to work from two, Sally Hansen's with a little brush, or the Lure Flash like this. And shortly I'll be dipping my dubbing needle in there. This is the way I do a whip finish. I recommend you get a whip finish tool, because this is I learned this from a book and it took a bit of time. You can see I'm just crossing over and how the bobbin is supported there. And now I use the one with a bit of tension on, and I just wind towards the eye several times. 3 or 4 times, doesn't matter. With a big fly you may go 5 or 6. And can you see how this silk is trying to kink? Now if I didn't put the dubbing needle in there, it would all kink up into a knot. So in that loop, I've dipped my needle in the varnish and I'm going to put it in this loop. I've only put the tip in. As I draw it up, I draw the dubbing needle down and the silk wipes the varnish off, just like that. Now, I'll varnish the head in a moment or two. I'm now going to cut the silk. Usual procedure, open to a gape, I should say, and gently push. And that's a silk cut. It doesn't matter too much cutting that way on a wet fly, but on a dry fly, if you cut the silk like this, you could remove some of the valuable hackles which we want to hold on to with a wet fly, with a dry fly. Okay, I dip my dubbing needle in the varnish again, and I'll varnish the head. I do this sometimes with the brush, sometimes with the needle like this. It doesn't matter how you do it. That's the finished fly. Now, the only item which should always be done is you check the eye is clear. You can either do it with a needle like that. When you fly tying, you always got a couple of old hackles about on your bench. You can use them as a sort of a bottle brush up through the eye and pull it through like that. And that wipes the eye clear. It's important to do that because down the river, especially if you're fishing for sea trout at night, you can't get your leader in the eye because you blocked it with varnish when you tied it up. So there we are. That's the completed fly. I hope you... I can recommend this fly wholeheartedly for South Wales rivers generally. And I hope you picked up some tips there. And if you did, I'd be very pleased. And I thank you for watching.